While I've talked about greenlighting, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about how greenlighting works in the AAA industry, at least, from what I've experienced. It's been a while since I've done AAA development. I don't think it's changed that much. And, I do know AAA developers and am familiar with some stories there. So basically, the problem is, if you look at game development, for AAA games, the budgets are huge, and no one really wants to say what the budgets are. But I think Activision said the budget for Destiny was like $500 million, which is crazy, and they tried to sort of caveat that. But I don't think anyone will say that Destiny was an inexpensive game to make. They had a huge team working out at Bungie, and they're still working on the game, and it's definitely a hugely ambitious endeavor, and even keeping up and running and patching all the ammo bugs and new, I don't know, events. I don't actually play Destiny, so I can't really say what they're doing, but I read a lot of articles about Destiny things, so something's happening, and getting the people to make those things happen is not free. But I think, like $100 million is not a, super surprising figure for a, sort of a top-tier AAA game. I'm sure there's some that are less expensive. I'm sure there's some, like Destiny, that are more expensive. But basically, no company wants to sink, $100 million into a loser. No company wants to sink any money into a loser. But the interesting thing is, if you sink some money into a project, you have a better idea of whether it's a winner or a loser. So I believe the current practice now is to essentially fund a pre-production for a bit, to get a vertical slice or a playable prototype, and then basically you pay a company, or you pay two companies to compete for the project, and then if you like the prototype, if you like what they come up with, then you fund more of the game, or you fund the entire game. Which, I don't think they'll ever, fund an entire game, and everything is conditional and milestones, and I think they reserve the right to cancel at any point, but basically, if you can, get your playable prototype, if you can get the game greenlit, then basically that's when you put all your people on it, whereas, the greenlight budgets are smaller. I don't actually know what they are, but let's say, $500,000 or $1 million, which, sounds like a lot of money, but it's not, especially in AAA development, where you have to assume at least $10K a man-month per person, and it's probably a bit more, especially if you're working in a studio in, like, Los Angeles area, or a really good studio. So basically, it can be expensive to, get to the greenlight stage, and so usually I think it's the publishers that are funding that, and then once they get to that point, basically they look at it and see whether they like it or not. And I think this is something that is... Sorry. I think this is something that is normally something that is not seen by consumers until recently. So, recently, Microsoft had a developer, Dark Side Games, I think, developing the new Phantom Dust reboot, sequel, remake thing. which I personally was excited about. And they basically canceled it, and the developer went out of business, which certainly is sad. Developers going out of business sucks. Just in terms of general health of the industry, and on a personal level, those developers losing their jobs. But basically, and there were not details really about what happened until someone from Dark Side Games leaked a what appeared to be a playable prototype, because up until that point they had only shown a trailer for Phantom Dust, and I think it's interesting because I'm willing to bet that was basically the result of the Greenlight process, where Microsoft took a look at it, took a look at the budget, ran the numbers, and tried to, maybe do mock reviews and try to get a feel for, what the game would sell, if it was something they were interested in, and for whatever reason, and obviously I have no idea, what the reasons are, they decided that would be a bad bet, and they're not canceling the project, they're just going to find another developer. And so, it's this weird sort of trial, dating process where you don't want to be married to a developer that's not going to create the game you want to make, the publishers, the game the publishers want to make. So basically they can try it, and in some situations they'll even put two developers up against each other and say, okay, we'll fund your greenlighting, we'll fund this other company's greenlighting, and then we'll choose the one they like the best. And it kind of seems wasteful, but it also kind of makes sense because if it's something new or different they're trying, they essentially have twice the chance that someone will come up with something cool, and then they can choose, and in terms of risk, it's just the risk of greenlighting two games, that smaller greenlight budget, whatever it is, versus the risk of the complete development budget. So it's definitely an interesting process, and I think it's basically a reason that the industry is able to handle these gargantuan budgets is that they know what they want. They sort of have an idea of what they're getting before they start paying. But I think to some extent it's limiting as well, because basically you have you have a limited amount of time to define the game, and it's much easier to find something that fits in a box. Go back to what say, okay, well, we're going to create a third-person cover shooter, or we're going to create a game that's like some other game, and that I think is much easier to both develop, because then you're not spending your greenlighting process asking a lot of questions and trying to define new experimental mechanics. You're basically cranking away at making something attractive and fully featured. So I think it is tough, because it especially if pre-production needs to be longer and you only have that limited budget, and the publisher isn't that interested in the game or isn't willing to sort of expand that. So you definitely can end up in a situation where basically you have a fixed budget, and you have to cut your cool ideas because they're not, they would cost more to develop. And I think also the greenlighting process is probably a very economical process, where basically I don't know if economical. It's definitely a business decision where they look at similar games and try and figure out what sort of return of investment they might get, and then if it's above a certain threshold, then they'll go ahead with the title. If it's not, then they'll then they won't pick it up for full development. And I guess it's not exactly canceled because it's not exactly they hadn't committed to it yet. But I think it's definitely a tough thing, because if you're creating something new and exciting, it's very difficult to predict how much that will make. So definitely, I think it's a reason that we're seeing a lot of innovation, a lot of interesting ideas coming from different development cycles. Even not necessarily just indies, but you look at like the Starbreeze, I think, makes the Payday, I think, and that's sort of an interesting game and an interesting way of developing it and releasing it and supporting it. So anyway, thanks for watching.